Welcome to our podcast, Born in Silicon Valley, where we interview startup founders exploring their journeys, their success, challenges, and lessons learned. We hope you'll be inspired in discovering what it takes to build a thriving startup. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, and here with us today we have Mike Adams, the founder and CEO of Grain. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here, Jake.
Great. So, Mike, a little bit about Mike. He's a three-time startup co-founder and recently transitioned from CEO to chairman of Grain.com. Mike's experience is building SaaS and edtech companies, which he shares as a guest lecturer at Stanford GSB. He lives in Laguna Niguel in Southern California, has a wife with three kids, and a new. So I love the fact that you're so close to where I am. I think you're the closest guest we've ever had. I'm in Laguna Beach or in Laguna Niguel.
Yeah, I think
Um,
you're just over the mountain from me.
yeah, there's uh, there's a lot that happens between where you live and I live on a weekly basis. From just a commute perspective, I get down to Dana Point, I go to different places, so it's always good to have other founders nearby. Um, Mike, before we kind of dive into your background here, we'll talk a little bit about the companies you had prior to this company you're building and have been building for a while, Grain. But are you originally from Southern Orange County?
No, so I'm originally from Utah, born in just north of Salt Lake City, and then grew up south of Salt Lake City. And then after college, moved over to the Bay Area where I started my career and spent a decade. And then COVID hit, three kids, one bathroom meant we needed to find more space. And that was easier to do in SoCal, and the weather is a little better down here. So that means my company moved fully remote, and we kind of planned to commute back to the Bay Area, keep the office open, and then the years dragged on, and then just kind of went remote. But we don't have any family down here, just kind of chasing the dream, and the kids love it. My daughter plays soccer and is able to compete with really talented girls and great coaches, and my son with baseball, and it's a good life, and we like living here. We do miss some aspects of the Bay, but generally, Orange County is a nice spot.
Yeah, that's great. And not too far from Utah, by the way, if you want to get back there,
Oh
just a
yeah,
nice flight back, and you're there in an hour, a little over that, a little under
yeah.
that. Um, so
John
really,
Wayne Airport, Santa Ana is just the greatest. So
yeah, makes it super easy. I just got back. I do a little skiing, and I was in Whistler a couple weeks ago, and I never got called off the mountain before for having frostbite. It was like
mm,
negative 30 degrees. And, since then, just been, putting stuff on the face, make sure it doesn't burn off.
geez,
But it's pretty
yeah,
crazy times. But Utah is a great place. I love to ski there too. And
good.
um, always good to be mixing it up. In terms of you, let's talk about your companies. We had a quick chat prior to jumping on the podcast here a while back. And some of the things that kind of stuck out to me were the fact that you've taken companies from ideas and built them out and actually have been acquired. Um, you mentioned that WeWork was a company that acquired you, and just want to kind of take us back a little bit of kind of the inception of you, and then and hit on a couple of the points of the startups you had prior to Grain, and what that experience was like to be acquired. I think it's always fascinating for founders to know that you think it's one thing, but when you go through it, maybe it's something different. So,
Yeah,
kind of just walk us through the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey.
sure. So for me, I think it all traces back to being the first generation college graduate. So I was super fortunate to be able to graduate from a great university, but then I had kind of no clue other than being a doctor or a lawyer or any of these like standard jobs. So tried out, the lawyer track, realized that was not what I wanted as I worked at a litigation consulting firm with my econ degree and decided to skip law school. And then I met my first co-founder just at a kind of party with a community that we're both a part of, and he had just left a company, and they got acquired and wanted to start a new one. We started doing that together. No salary for a long time. My wife was fortunate to work at a venture capital firm, so we were able to make it work. But that was kind of the founding journey of getting into education. But it all the story starts with wanting to solve the problem that I experienced, which is this like really rough transition from the, I would say, uh, education world into the working world. And with Degree, the focus is on credentialing. And then my second company is called MissionU, And that was more on the actual skill development training. And so MissionU is the one that got acquired by WeWork in 2018.
When you went through the acquisition, walk us through the playbook. How did that work, and what was the experience like?
Yeah, so it was pretty different than your regular acquisition, I would say. We actually, the acquisition ended up getting featured in the We Crash series on Apple TV. So if you watch that, it's in episode 6, and more or less what is portrayed there was what kind of happened is Rebecca Newman wanted to, build her school, and my co-founder is who she wanted to run it, and so that is kind of how it more or less played out. And I didn't end up actually wanting to join WeWork. In fact, Rebecca didn't really like me very much, so I wasn't even given an opportunity. So I think her questions are about, like, what's your spirit, energy, and stuff like that, and I don't think I played along well enough. And but it wasn't really the place for me. So I would say, like, the acquisition we went through was very atypical. And I remember the day my co-founder called and was like, "Wow, I just had dinner with the CEO of WeWork, and he wants to acquire us." And it all kind of happened from there. But I would say, like, the more practical upshots and lessons was, once you kind of allow yourself to go down the acquisition journey, it becomes very, very difficult to pump the brakes. It becomes like it almost kind of puts a standstill on the business. So WeWork ended up actually changing a lot of the terms, made it a lot
Mm.
less favorable compared to what we thought it was going to be. We were able to, like, get all of our students to, like, basically have free tuition, so that worked out well for what I cared about. Um, but by the time you kind of get to the end of it, and they pulled, what they pulled, like, there wasn't really a lot else we could do. There was just kind of like a lot of momentum, and we kind of let ourselves get a little bit too uh married to that outcome. And so then all of a sudden it changes. And I would say, from an acquisition perspective, that happens almost every time. Maybe not as much, funny businesses as there was going on around, with WeWork in general at the time. But there's almost, you can never really count your eggs until they've hatched. You can never really assume that the deal is done until the money's in the bank or until the docs are signed. Um, and so you have to kind of, like, continue to be your own independent thing, like you were before, even though the promise of something seems really great. So, like, for us, they promised to put a Mission U. We were an online, totally virtual school that had a little bit of an in-person component. So we were going to make every, WeWork a Mission U campus. So that to me was like, sweet. Like, we get to carry forward this vision, we get to carry forward this mission. And then just along the way, in particular, WeWork just had such a huge valuation that they were able to kind of, I actually call it, like, weaponizing it. I wrote a blog post about how anything past, I think it was the Series D, basically, like, all of those valuations ended up underwater. And so, like, Mission U was way past there. So, um, but they had this kind of clout from SoftBank and whatever, as if, all of this was gold and it was as good as cash in the bank. And you have to be really careful, because that's not usually how it ends up panning out. And frankly, I was quite skeptical. And really, if we were going to consider the acquisition, I wanted to kind of pivot the company into what became Grain, because we built software to manage all the content of our recorded sessions, our lectures, our admissions interviews. And so when the acquisition went through, I said, you know what, I'm just going to be the founder CEO of this other SaaS company. And it worked out great. So, like, at the end of the day, like, your future is kind of your own oyster. It's whatever you make it. Like, nothing ever goes really to plan, but there's always opportunity, as long as you're, making, you keep your eyes open. And so that's kind of how the whole thing played out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We got acquired too. This is, 10 plus years ago. And what you end up seeing initially, and then, as you were saying, like, the terms start to change a little bit,
Yeah.
and you're kind of halfway into the running the business, and also, thinking about the future of what it's going to end up being. And, um, yeah, when the money finally hits the bank, you're like, yeah, stoked. It's great. But, you you almost get slow played a little bit in the negotiation, until you finally just say, I just scratch that out. I'm okay with that not being part of the deal. And yeah, okay, we can push that aspect. And ultimately, it's a great experience to go through. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. And you had more clout in terms of who acquired your company. So it's probably a little bit different experience, but glad to hear that it kind of worked out for you and you had a different path that you took. And we'll talk about that as well.
It wasn't like a financially, I didn't really get anything out of the acquisition financially because we were such a young company. And, for me, it was all about, okay, if we're not going to deliver on this, promise we made to students, let's make sure that we finish, the job and get them jobs and make sure they don't pay the tuition. And that ended up becoming my focus. So it was like kind of like overnight, this path that we were planning to take shifts and become something very different. And that's okay, because I think at the end of the day, there's always opportunity that you can parlay something. And I would say the perception of the acquisition of being acquired by WeWork is really, I would say, valuable. I could play that up and make it seem like it was this insane, amazing outcome and I'm super, loaded or whatever. But like, that's not really me. That's not really what happened. And so, my chips on my shoulder are about like making it happen with Grain and building that into the best company I can possibly be. And so, um, yeah, it has been interesting though. One other kind of note on that was the moment that MissionU was announced as being acquired, it was like there was a lot of upheaval amongst the education community because they were like, this is this big, bold bet on replacing college that's venture backed. We'd raised like $12 million. And we'd only spent a couple million of it. We had the vast majority of it in the bank. It was pretty freshly raised. So everyone was surprised that, this outcome happened. But then the next week, it was like as if the whole company never had existed. It went from being
Mm.
like we're in the Today Show, people are writing about us all the time. Fast companies, best places, fast companies, most promising and innovative companies. To like, what was that thing? And I that was an interesting contrast I didn't really expect because you work and you're building a momentum, and then as soon as the momentum stops, it's kind of as if the whole thing didn't happen anymore to the world. I would say the reward that I continue to get is I just posted last week or 2 weeks ago on LinkedIn. I do this lecture at Stanford every year to teach about, it's like a case study to the students there about disruptions in education. And so I posted on LinkedIn about, the content that I share there. And so many of my students came back out of, the worlds that they live in now and talked about the positive impact that the program had, how it set them up on their job, how they, it fundamentally changed the course of their life. And to me, that's, the meaningful reward of like why I did the work. So to the world, the whole thing just kind of like died overnight. To the people who were part of it, we carried that forward with us in a meaningful way. But it was kind of like crazy to go so quickly from like we're going to change the world to like, oh, like we're doing something else now.
Yeah. It's interesting. Everything starts with a vision, hopefully something that's going to function, work, and grow and scale. But there's inspiration behind it. So I think I understand a little bit about the inspiration of Grain, but kind of walk us through the moment where you said, I have a different path I'm going to take, and this is what's inspiring me to try and build this thing now. What was that like for you?
The entrepreneurial journey is wild. And sometimes I take it for granted that I've been doing this for 12 years. I feel a lot of confidence. I feel a lot of, I have a lot of relationships. I have, some experiences under my belt. But I remember vividly how insecure and rattling it is when you're at the very beginning. It all seems so insurmountable. And after my first company, I remember distinctively talking to my wife saying, I want to be the CEO. I want it to be like my baby. I have a belief that every company has one founder and multiple co-founders, but you only have one founder. And I was not the founder of my first company. And I was said, I think it's time for me to be the founder of the second company. And my wife distinctively was like, no, you're not ready. You don't have an idea. And you just want to do this for the sake of doing it. And I thought about it. And I remember this dinner. We were in Potrero Hill in San Francisco, where we lived at the time. And I was like, you're totally right. This is just like kind of an ego based thing of like what I want to do right now. So I kind of recalibrated, ended up putting myself in some environments, doing research on what I want to do next, met my co-founder of MissionU, who is really the founder, and ended up being an amazing experience that was the genesis for what became Grain, the first company where I was the founder. Um, because it's really difficult to come up with insights that you really feel confident could become a company. starting a company for the sake of starting a company is almost always a bad idea. And I'm really glad I had a wiser wife than me who was like, don't do that. Because by the time I was like, this is the idea, it was a problem we had solved for ourselves and at MissionU, the company that got acquired. And I knew that it was a trend of where the world was going because Zoom finally made remote collaboration, education, et cetera, viable because there was a reliable audio video connection that didn't really exist before Zoom. They kind of fixed what WebEx and Teams or Teams wasn't really didn't exist at the time, but Meet had never really solved. So I kind of saw where that was going. I saw the opportunity that unlocked from being able to leverage the conversational data that was generated, and had a, I would say, pretty quick and easy transition from being the co-founder to the founder because I had the relationships, I had the idea and the insight, and then we were just kind of off to the races. But it really is a super nerve-wracking and confusing and difficult and insecure process that you kind of go through. But I do believe strongly that if you just put yourself out there and doing the work, maybe find the right partner until you're ready, like be the co-pilot, you put yourself in environments where you get the insights and you get the experience to where you can be ready to be the pilot. And I'm glad that it all played out the way that it did. And I think Grain has been a lot more successful as a result of the prior experience I had to learn from, two great co-founders I had before.
Yeah. COVID changed the world in a lot of ways, and remote technologies started to spring up everywhere. Some didn't make it, some did, and some carved out niches. What's the problem your platform solves, and what's your sector you're focused in on where it's used most?
The evolution of Grain has been wild. Like it's been quite the journey, and it's in a very different but still the same, you know, original thesis and premise. It's just that I would say the main evolution has been from a horizontal, almost Notion or Google Docs, like anybody can use this thing, very little opinions about who should use it, to over the last year in particular, we've learned that, to turn the business into to get it to profitability, which we're pretty close to now, and moving off of the reliance on, future rounds and future venture capital, we really needed to be, super specific and hone in on a specific person and a specific use case in what ended up being a kind of an existing market, where the first several years it was all about, we're going to carve out our new market, we're going to be the new market. And at the end of the day, markets are what markets are, and you can shape those markets as a company, but that is exponentially harder to do. Peter Thiel talks about this in 0 to 1 of, don't competition is for losers, is what he says. It's very true as a like measurement of the, unicorn backed, the unicorn outcome companies. That tends to be an association. It's a good ambition, but the odds go down a lot when that's your only focus. And so we've recognized that the horizontal kind of massive, growth path of being kind of all things to everybody just really left us with a lot of challenges on building the product, on growing the product, on being able to message and position the product that honestly instantly go away as soon as you say it's for these people and it solves this problem. And so that's kind of been the evolution that I've been through, I would say, over the last 5+ years of Grain. And it was really I brought in a president who's now the CEO. I handed over the reins to him in October, that helped. I would say he brought in fresh eyes, several years in the business, and a really strategic, mind. And that was kind of the catalyst to move from this like horizontal general world into the super specific, and it's paying off. It feels like the flywheel starts spinning a lot faster when you're building on a foundation that is specific and deliberate versus, I would say, ambitious but ambiguous.
Yeah. So, what is the target now for your platform?
So our market for, we'll say, conversational data. That's really what the core insight was when you record these meetings. Now all of a sudden you have an asset that you didn't have if you were in person, and unless you record it on your phone, which you probably won't do. and it's natural, it's organic. Like you barely even notice if it's being recorded, and generally the content is super benign, right? Um, there's been many different markets for that change in, I would say, the technical landscape of what's possible, and the unlock that can kind of come from a new data set. But without a doubt, the momentum that was before Grain, started by a company called Gong. They're like the biggest in the sales space. Is really still where the momentum in the market is, and that it's partially due to, I would say, the use case itself, but it's probably even more so to do with like budgets and ROI, justifications and pitches around being able to like close deals, save deals, train representatives. It's just so much more palatable with that sales use case. So we tried to avoid that for years. We were like, we're broad, we're horizontal, we're actually more focused on like creating highlight clips from the content and sharing those. And people loved that approach. People love the product. And that's still what the product can do at its core. It's got this like amazing creator ability that we wouldn't have if we didn't have that starting point. And it actually ends up being a nice differentiator for the sales team. But that is ultimately what we realized, was that we would get into a company, usually through the sales team, and then it spread across the company, and then they'd graduate out and then move to like the kind of the enterprise version of the product. And then we just left with like not nearly the same level of leverage or opportunity or growth, when you lose that kind of sales team at the center. So it took us a while to realize that like when it came to this product and the bottoms up adoption, that sales use case was kind of at the beginning, middle, and end. And all the other use cases that people have loved around our product are more kind of secondary when it comes to procurement, ROI, expansion, retention, et cetera. And so as we focused on sales, it's like every metric has gone massively better. It is a much more crowded market, and so it's a little bit more challenging, but we have like a differentiated position in that we're bottoms up, we're self-serve. You can buy our product for $19 a month for one person if you want, without talking to anybody, whereas like the kind of top end of the market is like a minimum of really $10,000 in spend. And so there's a huge gap in the market for something that is pretty established and everybody wants. And our approach is to bring, I would say, the best version of that for the lowest price and the easiest adoption path. And it's working really well.
Yeah, I love that. We talked about going to a freemium model and then looking to upgrade to more enterprise or more of a fee-based model. Um, what's the model today?
Yeah, so the model today is a primarily self-serve. So you'll just sign up for the product, use the free version of it. I would say we're faux freemium if you want to get technical. So the technicals of that would be, we have like a fixed number of recordings that you can use for free, and then once you're out of those, you add a subscription seat. Whereas a true freemium would be like you have X number of recordings a month into perpetuity, right? And so we have gone with kind of the faux freemium. I think we probably would have been better off going with full freemium, if I'm being, frank, um, because the challenge is that users can't think of like, oh, I'm gonna establish a habit that I can rely on in the future. Instead, it's like I can taste this thing, but I can't really keep using it for free. And freemium done well gets you into a habit loop, gets the new users into a habit loop completely on their own. And it's a high velocity sale, which is why it works, because you're basically moving your cost of goods sold, the server cost, the transcription cost, the processing costs, and making those marketing costs by giving it away for free. And so the more you give away for free, I would say the greater your acquisition cost is for users you ultimately end up, monetizing. And so, we've been a little bit more, I would say, on the aggressive side of making it kind of a faux freemium. But I think psychologically it becomes a little bit more challenging to truly adopt the product when you know that you're going to have to pay for it after 20 versus, oh, I keep using this product so much that I've run out of allocation for this month, so I need, I need a subscription to be able to continue using it at the volume that I've like learned to love and grow. So we're always playing around with it. So I've said that that's the way we do it. We actually did have it as freemium. We moved it over to faux freemium. We might move it back to freemium. But like in general, the principle of freemium being not a growth strategy, but a marketing strategy of moving those, I would say the cost of acquisition, from COGS up to CAC has been great for us. Like we have a very, very lean marketing team because the product is used and exposes new people to the product. It's such an easy adoption path, and then it can land what's called land and expand, where you ideally get to our true ideal customer profile, which is I would say kind of team of companies, usually between 25 and 250 employees. So you have a sales team between kind of 5 and 25. And now we've gotten to a point where if one of those folks can adopt the product self-serve, we usually do an assist motion where we'll reach out once they've reached usage thresholds. We'll guide and assist them. We'll make it easy to onboard the rest of their team. And now you're about 10xing your average contract value as soon as you go into that assist motion. But we didn't really have to do anything. We don't have a direct sales. We have minimal marketing activity because the product itself and the fact that they can use it for free is what usually is typically what drives our user acquisition.
Well, when we had our first call and it was recorded using Grain, it was instantaneously after we got off that call, I got an email from, I thought it was from you, it was from Grain or the automation of it. And it was not just a recording of our call, but it was also the video of our call, as well as being able to click on portions of the call summarized well. It was, I think, what you would want to see if you used a
Yeah.
platform like this. And that was just on a conversation. It was not a sales call. It was just more interaction. Um, I could just see how much time it saves you having to think about what was that call about 2 months ago, and do we have a good conversation, and what were the highlights of it, and being able to see that in real time was, I thought it was really impressive. And look, we've had a lot of products that we've talked to the founders about, and that was one that I was like, I could see this being used, for our company, but for a lot of organizations. So, what you built is transparently a very good product.
Thank you.
Um, and I think it should be looked at from anybody out there that's, considering how do you engage your customers and how do you do customer support in a lot of different areas. If you were to go back and you started the company, you've raised $20 million, but from really the beginning, uh, how would you have done things differently, if at all, or made any changes now that you are where you are today?
Yeah, I have so many learnings. But the main one is that I would have been a lot more deliberate about division of labor and responsibilities upfront in starting the company. So the thing I believe is an axiomatic truth that is just non-negotiable for anything I'm a part of going forward is that I talked about how there's a founder where there's one person who's ultimately yoked. It's their responsibility. It's usually their reputation. It's usually their idea. That person for product led growth company has to be the head of product. No negotiating. And we had I would say I started the company with my brother, and he's really, really good at product. And he had a great, venture tracked success. He was the first employee at a company called Branch Metrics, and he's super talented. But what ultimately happened is no matter how talented and smart he was, there's one person who's the ultimate decision maker, and that's the CEO. That's the I would say the capital F founder. And when there's a disambiguation between, I would say, that ultimate responsibility and then the execution of the core thing that you're building, that you're selling, that everything revolves around, it just creates communication friction, mythical man month, two pizza rule, whatever you want to call it, that makes it really challenging to overcome. And so we were able to work through that and get to a great place. And we actually, neither of us are the head of product now. There's the new CEO that we recruited in. We made him the head of product, and then I made him the CEO. So now that principle is aligned, and it's night and day. It totally shows because you're able to now rally, around one point of view instead of building by committee or building by, multiple perspectives. No matter how well intentioned, no matter how talented the people are, it's just you really do, when you're a brand new company, especially a venture backed company with, unicorn ambitions, everything has to focus through a single point. And I didn't fully understand that at the beginning of Grain. And if I did, I think our trajectory would be quite a bit different. And that's ultimately on me, right? But that's a lesson that I take, going forward, if I were to, ever be the capital F founder of a company again, and one that ultimately, like, as I'm no longer the CEO, and I have the head of product who is the CEO, I recognize that my job is to enable and empower him to set the vision, enable and empower him to have leverage, so that the company can grow as fast as possible. Because that, to me, is how the most successful companies are built, and something I definitely would do different if I were to do it again.
Thanks for sharing that. As a founder of a company, part of it is the vision, but the other part of it, it's the control of wanting to build out something that's in your vision with your voice and executing in a market. You think there's an opportunity to bring in someone else to be the lead, to be that CEO. Um, you know, has its positives and negatives for you. What did you make and why did you make the choice to bring in a CEO last year?
Yeah, a lot of it for me is personal, right? And I love the business, I love the company, I love our customers, I love our product. But I'm on the end of 12 straight years of just nonstop startup. My kids are getting a little bit older, and frankly, I just got fortunate that Jeff, that we brought in through acquisition, we actually acquired his company. I was an investor in his company, and he was frankly so much better at the CEO job, than I was at the time. I think that like good is all relative to time as well, right? Like certain people can be really good in one season of basketball and then not so good in the next season, then come back and be great. A lot of it is context based. And when I just look at like kind of the way things have played out, the majority of the company we've been rehiring as we've been kind of, I would say, reestablishing the foundation of the business has actually been nowhere near me. So as you know, in South Orange County, there's not a lot of, technical momentum, I guess you could say. Whereas in Utah, where Jeff is and where I'm from, there's a really strong technical community, tech community, and so Silicon Slopes. And so as we made all these hires, we started making them in Utah. I'm commuting there on an airplane, and I'm there a couple days a week. And that's pulled back a little bit since I'm not CEO anymore. But that ultimately just kind of felt like the natural evolution of the company and natural evolution of my life and my family, as the trust was so strong that it was like, I can take this thing that was fundamentally kind of like the culmination of my previous two companies and my entire career into this company, and actually give that to someone else to run, and have confidence that that's going to not only be done as well as I could do it, but actually better than I could do it based on kind of where I'm at right now and how things have evolved. And I do think that was fundamentally changed from COVID, because we had an office in San Francisco. We would all go in every day. It was like great for collaboration. We went fully remote. That introduced a lot of challenges. Now we're going back to being a lot more in person, but it's not where I live, and I'm not in a place with my life and family where I can or want to move. And so that's just the way things have evolved. And I believe fundamentally that if you're able to be self-aware enough as a founder or as a leader of any kind about and genuinely look at what's best for the organization and the people, that is a superpower. And that's something that I was not good at early in my career. It was all about the me show. But as time has gone on, I've been able to realize like how I'm just, one of the many, kind of cogs in the part of this large organization that, yes, ultimately like kind of came out of my head and my network and mine and the founding team's original work. But it's taken on a life of its own, and it is actually really cool and different to watch, and it's really satisfying in kind of a different way than the super high grip control that I would say I normally would do. And frankly, which is super necessary for the first several years of a company. You have to have that like dictatorially, vision and control, because that's the only way to get it off the ground. But once it's off the ground, there's a lot of options if you're open to them, and you kind of don't let your insecurity and ego get in the way. Like I would say I've done many times in the past, but was fortunate not to do here.
Yeah. Really cool to hear. I can't wait to see how that continues to go for you. How do you approach leading a remote company as someone who is an outspoken critic of remote work or who has been a critic of that?
So I'll first caveat. So I wrote a blog post or a LinkedIn post that ended up getting a couple million views, where it started and it says, I don't know, disclaimer or something like, I lead a remote company but I hate remote work. It was a nice provocative statement that ended up, getting a lot of views. But really the reason I think it resonated with folks is about a year ago I wrote this, was because the truth that I shared in that post was that remote is as a startup leader, especially when you're trying to innovate and you're trying to move really, really fast, in person is everything. If you ask people who've really built things before, it is so much harder to do remote. It's just so much more organic and easy, in the relationships and the trust and everything you're doing. I miss the taco truck is what I talk about a lot of, the taco truck that was downstairs from our San Francisco office that we just go and have lunch every day. And when you lose the taco truck, you lose a lot of things. And so for me, I was kind of stuck in these loops of the past of what was, and yearning for and wishing, wishing for things to come back. But like, the world is not going to go back to the way that it was before. I'm not moving back to San Francisco. Neither is everybody else who moved away. People left, people have joined. And so we had to be really intentional and deliberate about the way that we overcame the disadvantages of being fully remote. So my point of the blog post is, just because it's beneficial to me as the leader to be fully in person, doesn't mean that that's best for everybody. So it doesn't mean it's best for the employee. So where we've landed with Grain is that now I would say non-engineering and leadership are pretty much all in person, or I'll commute there. But I'm really the only one that is commuting, and I'm there, pretty regularly. And that has fundamentally improved the equation. From a year ago when I wrote that blog post, it was in January that I started going and regularly commuting, and it's so much better. And so every team ultimately needs to kind of like make their own choices and structure their company in their own ways, and it's going to be a reflection of the preferences of the founder and the leadership. But I do think that there is like kind of a middle ground between the old world where it had to be 100% in person. Frankly, I don't want that anymore either. Like it's not optimal. Like, you don't get the free thinking. I don't get as much time with my kids. Like, I've been able to train for, Ironmans and compete in these, races that I wouldn't have been able to do if it weren't for the flexibility that comes with remote. So it's all trade-offs, but you have to find that, balance that works. And I would say the default being fully in person and the default being fully remote, neither of those is an option that I prefer. Some people do, but I think that hybrid middle ground is something that most companies coming out of COVID have realized is actually the ideal balance, to have a few days a week in the office, et cetera.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like where you're coming from. One word that you talked and just I want to touch back on is balance. I think it's important to balance that hybrid on-site, off-site, remote with your team, but it's also important to balance your personal life with the work and things you do outside of work. Talk a little bit about the Ironman, the training, the experience, and what does that give you personally? But does that help you as a business leader as well?
Yeah, for sure. So I was sitting at a pool on my first vacation in a long time in Hawaii in February of 2020. And I looked down, and I have a couple of young kids, and we didn't have our third kid yet. And I just had this big belly that I'd never seen before. And I was like, that's got to go. And so startup life had taken its toll. And I was like, I'm going to, assert some control, which type A people tend to want to do. So I went home, I signed up for a triathlon, just a little sprint that takes about an hour. I signed up for another one, and I even signed up for a half Ironman in Santa Cruz. And I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm serious now about this. I've never swam more than a lap, never really run, never really biked, but I was like, I want to figure this out because it's my means to like getting control of my health. COVID hits, all the training goes, I would say all of the races go out the door, but I stuck with my training and it became like what I called my COVID cure. It was like the one thing I could control in a world completely out of my control. And I feel like that's a really critical thing for anybody who's dealing with a high stress environment, especially when you have a lot of pressure as a leader, is to have things that are productive and good for you, that are, good for your mental health, good for your physical health, that you can have full control over, and making sure that you find time. Because the upside was of not commuting was that I could, go on swims and rides and bikes and be done by 8 a.m. And it's 4 years later. 2 years ago, I ended up completing a full Ironman in St. George, Utah. It ended up being the world championship that they moved from Kona, Hawaii to St. George, and so I was able to compete with the best triathletes in the world, even as a relative newbie. And it was amazing. And I took a break for a little bit afterwards. I kind of burned myself out, but it just this bug started to come back. And I'm training right now for another triathlon because I love it. And I found a community of people that are other type A builders that also use this as their kind of stress relief. And it is a really, I would say, important part of my physical and mental health regiment that is now like I feel super, I don't know, just like a blob of goo if I don't get my workouts in, which is crazy because before that I went 10 years without basically working out other than like a random gym session, never going on runs, that type of thing.
Did you lose the belly?
I lost the belly. Yeah. So, I mean, there's two things that will lose bellies. One is burning a lot of calories, and the other is not consuming a lot of calories. And so, I actually found that the far more efficient path is to just consume less calories, and
Yeah.
intermittent fasting is actually, I feel like, far more effective way of managing weight than spending hours and hours running and on bikes, because it makes you really hungry. So you end up actually eating a lot of calories, and your deficit is a little bit harder to manage than if you can just train your body to be like okay with being a little bit hungry. So it's tough to mix those two, though, to do the intermittent fasting and the high intensity training. And so I kind of tend to swap between one or the other as the training becomes too much or the fasting, kind of grows old.
Yeah. Yeah, I know my doctor, I had gained a few pounds too, and my doctor was like, "Yeah, I think you got to lose about 10." I'm like, "Okay, great." He's like, "Do me a favor, don't hit the gym 5 days a week and burn out, because you're going to lose 80% of your weight by your diet. So
Yeah.
focus on eating these things and spend 20% time, actively going to the gym or whatever you're going to do." And it actually does work. So anyway, it's like the little things that people tell you that you don't think and you don't overcomplicate that usually typically work. As we start to wrap up here, as you look out, over the next 5 years, what's your conviction on that you think will be true that isn't true today?
Yeah. So I think we are in the next big platform shift. So I've been on record and we'll go on record again, and all the crypto people can come at me because I think, blockchain is, and all the crypto thing is just, I'm not into it, never been into it, never been a believer. It's not the revolution that was promised. And there's a lot of issues with it. And the challenge that I have is that they kind of hijacked Web3 as being about like crypto and blockchain and whatever, and something that like is not going to have a meaningful impact on the world from where I sit. Debate me all day long on theoretical, things that don't make sense to me. I understand it at a technical level, but like at a pragmatic level. But what really is Web3 is this generative AI, arrival that started really a little over a year ago with just the blowing up of ChatGPT. This is a fundamental shift in technology that is universal and that you can use it on anything you want. It's accessible. Anybody has access to not just ChatGPT, but the API that powers it, and the open source models that now have been developed that are not proprietary to OpenAI, Microsoft. And it has fundamentally changed our product grain from our core value thesis. A year ago, it was about really making it easy to create highlights and timestamps notes and do like creator work on top of your transcripts and your videos, and then generating outputs that were usually like a 30-second video clip you can share in Slack. That is now like a tertiary benefit, because the primary benefit of the product is that it just automates everything about your note-taking workflow, like if you hired someone to do it, and you can customize it and you can tailor it to be exactly what you want. And we're in like the bottom of the first inning of what's possible with this technical shift. And so the way I've been kind of anchoring it is, I feel like, personal computing was one of the first huge platform shift. And then you had, the arrival of the web and the internet, and then you had mobile. And the fourth is, in my view, generative AI and these large language models that are fundamentally changing, I would say, what's possible to achieve with technology, to augment workflows, to remove, I would say, mundane and monotonous tasks. And I would say over the next 5 years are increasingly going to feel and look a lot more like true intelligence, thought partnership, and I would say novel generative idea generation that is just even more in its beginning stages than things that are starting to develop a little bit more around like summarization or taking meeting notes or very specific tasks that can be outsourced to this AI model. Because just like my skepticism of that remains for blockchain crypto, I was super skeptical of all the over marketing and overhype of AI. And now all of a sudden, overnight, you're like, no, this is actually here for real now. And it's fundamentally changing the way that we do things. And the world's going to look a lot different when it comes to, human interaction with technology in 5 years from now than it does right now, because of the power and the flexibility and the promise of this technology, not to mention, the next fundamental technologies that this is going to help us to get to faster.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great point. And yeah, we're really bullish on AI too. And we're seeing it in every sector of our client base that is using it and adopting it and integrating it with their own technology and platforms. And uh, you know, just this morning I was looking at OpenAI, and in the last 12 months they've hired over 800 people, and they're just on this like rocket ship of growth for the right reasons. They have customers, they have paying customers, they've raised lots of money, they're also making a lot of money, but they are innovating, and they're solving problems today for us. Then they're going to be solving problems, I think, for a long time for a lot of different companies. And there's a lot of inspiration that's coming out too, where companies are popping up left and right that are carving out their little niches. So we'll see what happens in the future. But I'm really excited to see what happens with Grain. And if
Nice.
anybody wants to find you or find Grain or try your product, where do they go?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn most. So I'm just Mike Adams on LinkedIn. If you search Mike Adams Grain, you'll find me. I'm on Twitter a little bit, but I've just found X Twitter to be less of the place where I like to throw my thoughts into the world lately. And then I'm actually starting a new podcast on generative AI. I haven't launched yet, but it'll be coming out in the next couple of months, where I'm just sitting down and talking with the smartest people I know, the smartest technologists I know, talking to them about how they're leveraging and using generative AI. So that's going to be called the Generative Podcast, but it's not out yet. So maybe by the time this is really released, we'll do that. But you could find that where all the podcasts are.
Very cool. Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for coming on and taking your time to spend with us today, as well as our listeners for listening. It means
No
a lot to
problem.
me and our company. And I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, signing off for now, but can't wait to catch up with you all in the next episode. Until then, Mike, community, take care. Before we wrap up, I want to give a big shout out to all the entrepreneurs that have joined to make this podcast possible. And for all the listeners for listening. It means the world to me that you chose to spend your time with us today. I'm your host, Jake Aaron Villarreal, signing off for now. We can't wait to connect with you all soon on the next episode. Take care. This show is sponsored by Match Relevant, a company that helps venture-backed startups find the best people in the market, and they do it in 3 simple steps. First, they sit down with founders to understand their story. Second, they tell their story into multiple candidate channels. And third, they schedule interviews within 48 hours. Find us at matchrelevant.com to learn more about how we do it.